This afternoon, we have a presentation by Kosetsu, Randy Earl. He is going to be discussing mourning and dealing with loss. As you all know, as we're getting ready to go into, let me pause this for a second. For our getting prepared for our Dharma talk, we start our Dharma talk with apologies there. We have some noise in the background there. With our opening verse, and Sensei Tashin, if you could get us started off, and we'll start with our opening Dharma verse, then we'll pass the ball over to Kosetsu.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth.
Okay, hello everyone. First, let me do a sound check. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So again, I hope you've had a good conference so far. I've certainly been enjoying this opportunity to meet with my Dharma brothers and sisters, everybody in the Sangha here. It's been very refreshing in these challenging times. And that's the theme of our gathering here, Zen practice through challenging times. And I don't think anyone can dispute that case. So many challenges, and all at the same time, simultaneously, with many of our coping mechanisms that we're used to no longer available to us. So in the conference planning process, when we asked what I might talk about, the answer came to me pretty immediately. I was dealing with some serious losses at the time and feeling it deeply. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Everyone that I know is affected. So, you know, and that's two things that strike me very deeply about the world we are in now, is that everyone is affected, and everyone's situation is unique and different. They're affected in different ways. But the universality of it seems pretty clear to me. And we've all suffered real losses in the pandemic, across a broad range, and we could all come up with the list, right? From seemingly trivial things like being able to go out to a restaurant or to go see a movie, to see your friends, and more serious things like your ability to go to work. You may not be able to go to your physical workplace. You may have reduced work or pay, or may have even lost your job. We can't send our children to school and to other social development activities, and the parents among us are increasingly worried about the impact this is going to have on their educational and social development. Friends and coworkers and family, you know, some of us have acquaintances like that have gotten ill or perhaps even died. So, and I could go on, and we all know the list. We've all experienced many of them directly. What I'm going to do is what I typically do, is I'm going to use my lived experience as an example, because that's what I can say is true, even if only in a relative sense, relative to myself. I typically talk to my own experience rather than being hypothetical. So, all that said, you know, I do like to step back sometimes and say, well, aren't all times challenging? And I don't say that to trivialize what we're going through now, but it's worth asking the question to me, what makes the pandemic different? And I think there are a few aspects that make it very different. First, the intensity. Yes, there are some minor difficulties that we're dealing with, but there are some major impacts on our livelihood, on our health, physical and mental, to the point where, as a nation, we have nearly 1,000 people dying every day. Another aspect that makes the pandemic different is the pervasiveness. It affects so many aspects of our lives. I don't think many of us realized going into this how many aspects of our life would be affected. And that leads to also kind of what I consider to be the third really differentiating aspect of the pandemic is the shared nature of the suffering. Since it does impact in so many ways, nobody really escapes. We all are sharing the nature of this suffering. We're all impacted, right? So that when that's not the case, it's kind of easy to overlook the suffering of others, right? It's remote. I don't see it. I don't know anybody who's impacted, or it's a small percentage and they'll find another job soon or whatever. You know, it's kind of easy to write off individual cases, but in a situation like this where we're all feeling it to varying degrees, that is a very different experience in terms of the shared suffering and the shared awareness of each other's suffering. And sadly, we can't even deal with this in so many of the ways that we're used to. Many of our coping mechanisms are not available to us now. We can't meet with friends and family or socialize. Many of the relaxation activities we do for a little, it might be avoidance, or it might be just, I need to rest for a little bit from this, you know, like going to the movies or going out for a meal at a restaurant or something like that. We can't do that. Many of these self-care things that we've been used to doing, we can't do anymore. We can't go to the gym. I know relying on home deliveries, you know, we can't get the variety and quality of foods that we had when I could go grocery shopping at will. So a lot of those coping mechanisms are not available to us. And even the more serious ones, sadly, I've experienced 2 deaths in the pandemic and of close friends and family members. And we were not able to have funerals for either of them, or not funerals that you know, many people could attend as we would. So that just exacerbates the impact of the pandemic. We have lost so many things, and we are dealing with how do we deal with that? How do we process it? You know, how do we go through the normal processes of mourning and grief? And I hadn't necessarily thought about that explicitly until a few weeks ago in Dokusan with Hojo. He asked me that question very directly. He asked if and how I thought Zen practice has helped me deal with the pandemic. And I really didn't have to think before answering. I replied that it absolutely has helped me, in that I can more easily step back and observe, evaluate the situation. It does not mean that I'm not stressed, I'm not feeling emotions, but it means I can more clearly see how I am stressed and why and what I might do about it. And thinking about this, now that it, you know, was brought to my mind in preparing for this talk, I decided to look up the 5 stages of grief, because you know, we've all heard of this and could probably all name, you know, 3 or 4 out of the 5. And this is the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And the 5 are in order. I think these are supposed to be, typically, you know, people would experience them in sequence: denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And I think we can all resonate, you know, with some of those. We've seen where this has happened. But what surprised me when I looked at that cycle was that for some recent traumatic events in my life, I didn't spend much time in the first 4 phases I was pretty quickly in the acceptance mode. And I don't mean that as any claim that I am beyond reactivity, beyond such emotions. I felt plenty of emotion, but I feel those emotions were based in accepting the reality, not trying to deny it. So what does that mean? And again, I can speak mostly to my experienced reality. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I do make a practice of sitting with your feelings, or with my feelings, with acknowledging them, seeing how they manifest in my body. We've had a couple of speakers now talk about really using body awareness as a practice. How does an emotion manifest in your body in all kinds of ways? You know, muscle tensions, patterns in the way you move and behave, things like that, how you feel and experience your body. So I make it a real practice to sit with an emotion, and I want to be careful about that phrase, sitting with it, not analyzing, not judging, not dwelling, not all the storytelling of why me, why did this happen to me, why couldn't it happen to somebody else, you know, the bargaining in a way, things like that, but just being aware of it, letting it come. And it may well be very powerful, maybe even overwhelming, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I just, you know, I will say very clearly, I have flat out sobbed on the cushion more than once. That can happen. As we've all alluded to, you know, we go back to teachings from various teachers that we respect in the tradition. And one that I go back to once in a while is Thich Nhat Hanh. And he has spoken so eloquently on this subject. And I'd like to just read a quote from him. And he says, when you sit with an emotion, you recognize that emotion. You embrace it tenderly and look deeply into it. As you embrace your pain and you get relief and you find out how to handle that emotion. And if you know how to handle the emotion, then you have enough insight in order to solve the problem. The problem is to not allow that anxiety to take over. When these feelings arise, you have to practice in order to use the energy of mindfulness to recognize them, embrace them, look deeply into them. It's like a mother when the baby is crying. Your anxiety is your baby. You have to take care of it. And that's the end of the quote. And that seems in some ways counterintuitive for these negative emotions that we don't like, sorrow and grief and things like that. To say that we have to take care of it sounds counterintuitive. But to me, it's like, it's similar to a young child. You know, those of us who have children, sometimes you know that they're not going to go away if they have a question or something until you really focus on them. Give them your full attention, listen to them carefully and deeply. And once they felt heard, then they can go on with what else they want to do. And I think these emotions are the same way. They have to be recognized and felt. Again, not analyzed and dwelt upon, but just giving it full focus. And then eventually you can both move on. And I think that's one of the key recognitions, is that this too is impermanent. It can seem like it's not at the time, but no matter the strength of your emotion, it too will pass. It is in the nature of that emotion to be impermanent. And the recognition of impermanence in general and impermanence of this particular state in particular can help with allowing it to pass. Now, I'm speaking to my experience. I have sat with difficult emotions. I have sobbed on the cushion. And that's not easy. And the more traumatic the experience you're dealing with, the more difficult it can be. And I don't want to diminish that. I have known people who have not been able to sit with something for very long. And we've heard in discussions about perhaps sitting more frequently for not as long, right? That might be a way to deal with something like that. Kuwa-san talked earlier today about meeting with resistance. We can definitely meet with resistance in terms of facing these kinds of issues. I personally found that persistence is very helpful. And that, again, was part of the discussion earlier today, where just persistence, coming to it again and again and again, even if in small doses, can help process through it. And at some point, it will lose its energy once it's been recognized and accepted. So that said, I also want to say that's talking about dealing with Zazen, but Zazen is not the only approach to take. You know, there are many different methods for processing your emotions, and they can work for different people in different situations. The point is that we can take the mindfulness that we develop on the cushion and apply it to whatever situation we find ourselves in. So first and foremost, you know, one of the things that's kind of been very clear, or more clear for me in this pandemic situation, is that self-care is very important. You know, it's like putting your mask on first in the plane, right? You've got to get rest, nutrition, exercise, all those things. I know Fusatsu was reminding us before lunch break that we needed our hydration, our protein, and vitamin D and things like that. I know she and I both, when we're planning in the back end for the conference, we say, okay, I got to go take my walk break now, and things like that. So that kind of self-care is very important, and it's so easy when our routines have been disrupted and you can't go to the gym and things like that. It's harder, but it's more important than ever. And then once the basic self-care is out of the way, you can find other ways that work for you or for specific situations. I've noticed in my office, many more of our work calls now start with, how are you doing? You know, school has started. How's your middle schooler, you know, adjusting, things like that personal connection. Family Zoom calls are now more important to me than ever before, because it's harder to see them for multiple reasons. Again, to use Fusatsu as an example, sorry, I don't mean to be picking on you, but you do so many great things. She starts our communications committee planning meetings with just some deep breathing. Before we do anything, we're going to stop and breathe. And that's a fantastic technique. Another thing I have started doing is I've started journaling, just because I find that putting things into words helps clarify them for me, helps me process them. Nobody else may read them. I may never read them again, but the process of writing some things out is helpful. And I'm not saying that's the answer for everybody. These are just what I can speak to that I have found work for me. So, and again, the mindfulness we develop on the cushion and take off of the cushion can help us find and develop those different techniques. And I would like to give a couple of more significant examples, if I may. So one, I'm going to use my wife for an example. Her family is very tight-knit. And in the last year, we've lost 2 members of their elder generation. This was the first time in 52 years that they were not able to hold the annual Labor Day family gathering, which was a key bonding time for the family. To lose that now, especially when we all need support, not only for the pandemic, but to mourn our lost loved ones in the family, was especially hard. So my wife thought very deeply about this and developed a few methods for the missed reunion to support making sure the technology was in place, to have a family Zoom call, set up some Google groups to share documents and things like that. And in thinking deeply about how to facilitate that family bonding, she set up some family history trivia quizzes and sent them out. And then as the lead in to the family gathering call, kind of went through the scoring and what was the right answers. And it just led to a fantastic family discussion. And, you know, the family recognized that and really valued it. As another example, a dear friend and colleague of mine died this year. I thought maybe I'd get through the talk. She was our HR manager. She liked to be called the chief people person. And she encouraged me to offer meditation at work. And as many of us have seen, when you offer meditation, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, that sounds great. I want to try that. I want to do that. And a few people come, and then it kind of tails off. And you have some regulars, and then you have a few who come sporadically. And she was my regular. Many mornings, she and I were sitting zazen together alone at the office. So she developed cancer, and the chemo compromised her immune system, and we couldn't visit her. So we thought about what we could do. We provided we gathered images and quotes, and you can get them printed on fabric panels and make up a quilt so that she could be wrapped in our love, and things like that. Set up an E-frame with all those rotating through. So we could really, in many ways, be there with her and for her. And for me, one of the ways that I've deal with things like this is I dabble in poetry. And I know Sankey does the same. He mentioned it yesterday. Back in years ago, when we had a forum on the website, he and I, as I recall, were a couple of the regulars in terms of contributing a little bit of poetry to the forum. But anyway, I wrote a poem for her. And again, for a technique, I find that very helpful in terms of poetry is a method that can help you express the inexpressible. And then finally, when she passed, I apologize. I sat with an empty cushion next to me. So, I sat with an empty cushion next to me. And, you could see that maybe as a method for like clinging. But to me, that was a way to really feel that emotion, and then to let it go. Of course, now maybe I'm feeling like I didn't let it go all that well, right? But by the same token, I feel like I really, truly, deeply acknowledged her passing, rather than, in daily life, pre-pandemic, it's so easy to be busy. I know there are times when I made that judgment call of, well, do I go to this funeral or not? How close were they versus how busy I am, In the pandemic, I think it's more important to really face these things because we have to, so we need to do it intentionally, if you see what I mean. So that was why one reason I put the empty cushion there was for the intentionality of, let me face this. So it's going to sound funny to say this after I've just cried in the talk. So I said earlier in my answer to Hojo's question that I found it easier, for lack of a better term, to get to acceptance. So as hard as those examples that I just gave work for me, I still hold to that statement. I do think my Zen practice has made it easier for me to deal with the pandemic. And why is that? Well, I'm gonna zoom way out now, up to the high levels of the Buddhist path, and say that's the very first step in the eightfold path, right? Right view or right understanding, insight into the true nature of reality. I've been training myself in that mindset throughout my Zen practice, as we all have been doing, right? So I think with that kind of preparation, when we encounter a situation like this pandemic, it reminds me of the Buddha's story, and I think this has already been mentioned. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, of his awakening when he saw the examples of suffering outside his palace. And I think the story was structured that way for a reason. He was able to see those cases in sharp relief to the life he was living sheltered within the palace. You didn't get used to them gradually like most of us do in our daily life. And I think the pandemic has done a very similar thing for us in that it's really hitting us in the face with, you cannot ignore this suffering, right? Even though we've kind of gotten used to all those little things, we haven't been in a sheltered palace. We've been sheltered in some ways. So we can't ignore, dismiss, or avoid the suffering around us as easily as we could pre-pandemic. It really brings home the first of the Four Noble Truths. So even though we talked about some specific techniques above, we're kind of at the higher abstraction level now, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. So we talk about the Four Noble Truths, and that's interesting in and of itself because we treat them as nouns, as truth statements, right? The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that frees us from suffering. So that I think of as a very Western approach, the use of nouns, kind of the Judeo-Christian tradition of truth statements. What do you do with a truth statement? Either you accept it or you don't, right? I don't particularly find that very helpful. I really like a teaching by Stephen Batchelor. He's an academic and practitioner, and he teaches it in the form of the fourfold task. And these tasks are: suffering is to be comprehended, the arising of suffering is to be let go of, the ceasing of suffering is to be beheld, and the path is to be cultivated. And he has a nice little acronym. It's ELSA, E-L-S-A. Embrace life, let go of what arises, see its ceasing, and act. Now, this little jujitsu twist from a noun to a verb, from a truth statement to an action, I think is incredibly powerful, because this is what we're doing in our path. We are developing that awareness, embracing the impermanence of life. We are practicing over and over and over again, letting go of those attachments. We are seeing the results of letting go of those attachments and then taking that action forward into the world. And I find that very, very powerful. And that's why I feel like our practice has really prepared me for the pandemic. And it just reinforces that that process, as with so many things in Buddhism, it's not a path. You don't get through the 4, you don't get through the 8 and you're done. It just loops back and you do it over and over and over again. And it continues to build each portion of it. Going through that cycle reinforces the first of the eightfold path, right? The right understanding. So I need to take a breath. Fusatsu's reminder, take a breath. So, at that high level of abstraction, I just want to remind and say, again, even though I broke down in tears, mourning is not necessarily discriminating mind. It's not analysis or rationalization, but rather a recognition of and being with what is, simply allowing it to be, as in Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful teaching. And then, some of the other teachings, like to grieve too much or spending too much time and energy in the first 4 stages of those 5 stages of grief, is in many ways a clinging to the past rather than recognizing and living in the present, right? And that's another thing that we focus on is, don't live in the past, don't dwell on the future. Let's live in the moment, in the situation where the moment is right now. Okay. Now, an emotion is, well, that's what I'm feeling right now, but I'm not trying to change the past. So I'm not trying to, overly plan the future. And as I do so many times, I personally kind of like to pull things back to Dogen, And Sankey referenced Dogen's Genjo koan yesterday, the koan of our life. And one of the things that Dogen does masterfully is shifting perspectives from relative to absolute, which can be extremely helpful. From the relative perspective, relative to us in our daily lives and normal perception, yes, we have lost something, many things, and it's a real loss, okay? However, from the absolute perspective, there is no separation. There's nothing to lose, right? To even say that we lost something implies that we had it to begin with, which is a false assumption, a false understanding. We can't lose it because we never had it to begin with, right? And we can't, no second thing, right? So personally, I find this kind of relative versus absolute analysis easier to relate to in the case of a person or a relationship that has ended or changed due to death or illness, because it's easy to say, I don't know, for me, it's easier to take that approach in a relationship. And it seems a little bit harder to relate it with something more abstract like a job, right? Or at least at first pass. However, even with something like a job, if we look at the personal effects it can have, such as a sense of security, you know, then we can still, or a sense of accomplishment or pride, right? Or our place in society, then we can still apply that absolute perspective and see that it was only an illusion to begin with. That security was never something we could really have anyway, right? So to wrap up, you know, I have to ask the question, does all of this discussion mean anything useful, or is it just sophistry, right? We all want to survive the pandemic. How do we get through it on a daily basis? But I absolutely think there is value. Coming back to my answer to Hojo, is I think my Zen practice has fundamentally impacted my response to the pandemic. It's made it easier for me to be aware of my own emotions and motivations, to be more aware of and sympathetic to the impact on others. And it's helped me to mindfully develop and apply coping strategies. This is easier said than done. There's not a pill we can take or a diet or an exercise regimen. So, okay, if we do this, that's it. But on the other hand, we can kind of say, well, there's the regimen of sitting on the cushion every day, of you know, participating in this kind of Sangha support as we are right here, right now. That is, for me, that's the recipe. And the pandemic has only shown me more clearly both the need for this path, but also the effectiveness it has in reducing my own suffering. So sure, I'm still suffering. That's the nature of life. But I'm certain the intensity and duration of my suffering is much less than it would be if I were not following the Buddhist path. That's the thought I want to leave you with, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Let's all collectively take a breath. Kosetsu, thank you so much for opening your heart and sharing your vulnerability. I'm so grateful to have you as we're so grateful to have you as our Dharma brother and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. That being said, Sangha, now is the time for us to be able to have the conversation with Kosetsu and together with what he has shared with us in his shared experience and in our shared experience. So now we'll open up for questions or comments, and again, collectively take a pause. Again, Kosetsu, thanks so much. It's such a pleasure to work with you on a weekly, daily, moment by moment basis. His heart is all the way through his work and his practice and his wisdom. So thanks so much. But again, let's open it up for the group for comments and discussion. Yes, Kushin.
Kosetsu, thank you so much for your beautiful time spent with us, with your personal life and also your wisdom about the path we've all chosen to experience differently and through the same lens. I just have a short comment. It's been a great privilege of mine for the past 20 years to be a hospice volunteer and also work with kids and families that have lost a loved one. And I too have got some of my biggest teachings back when my father died, and I was with him. I was able to be with him for 9 months until he died, caring. And it was his biggest and last gift to me. So first, my heart just is connected to your words, and your emotions were beautiful and genuine, and thank you for feeling able to do that with us. You spoke so well about relationship and our path. And as you were speaking, one of the earliest things I learned working particularly with kids that had suffered deep loss, and the teachers that I learned from then and my experiences with my dad in hospice eventually taught me, not at first, but it took a while, was, you know, we aren't losing relationships, but we are changing relationships. And they can still be as real as we wish them to be, and as generous as they always have been, to keep our hearts in the right place. We don't have to fully lose heart within our sorrow and loss, and carry our relationship forward in a new direction. And I think that's true for our path as Buddhists and practitioners too, at least what I've found. You talked about the strength of the mindfulness training from our practice has supported this journey through COVID. And I agree so intensely with that. I believe that is true. And I see the path we're on also not ending relationships with our past, but changing the way we walk now, and accepting things that were difficult before and still running into walls that we need to seek solutions to. But this notion of generating a new ability in relationship to impermanence, to loss, to growth has been extraordinary. And I think you spoke to that so well. So I just wanted to bring that into the discussion and strengthen your beautiful words. And again, you're so gracious to share that. And I think it's so important now, and it's helped me as well. So deep bows.
Thank you for your support. I deeply appreciate that. And I agree completely with what you say. You know, any of us, you know, we could take our topics and talk for ages and ages. That's one of the branches I didn't go down, but you're absolutely correct in that I also feel that my practice allows me to see much more deeply this person's impact, or any of them, you know, their impact on my life and how I have absorbed that. And I definitely feel like, due to that deeper awareness, that I do have an ongoing relationship in that sense. You know, I see how they've impacted my life, continue to inform my life. I had, you know, an additional story about her. I had a story about my grandfather, and I thought, nobody wants to hear all these stories all day, you know, but the point was they demonstrated how that I definitely feel their influence. And I think that increased self-awareness that we develop on the cushion, you know, helps make that more clear. So thank you.
Sensei Sengaku.
Thank you, Kosetsu. I was thinking about the way you pulled the Buddha story in, sitting under the Bodhi tree, and it was not his experience that's so important. What's important is that he taught from his experience, offered teachings. To experience grief is what we all do. We all don't have the opportunity to offer it as a helpful way for others to take. And I think you were looking at it from a lot of different angles, and I certainly appreciate that. I'd mentioned to my Sangha that a few months ago, I looked in the mirror while I was shaving and saw my father. Interestingly enough, I'm 12 years older than my father when he died. I offer that only as a representation of things still being with us in a changed way. It's there in a changed way. I think that's what our teaching is. Nothing is created, nothing is dissolved. It simply is there and continues to unfold, manifest in a variety of different forms. The other thing you said, which is most important, is having the opportunity to have Dokusan, having the opportunity to have friends, to be involved with this. And all of this is obviously extremely important. But bringing it to the Sangha, as you have done, is something for us. It's a present for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's a thought I've had today as well, is that to see, you know, our Sangha members here and to see their depth of experience and knowledge and skills in the world and in their practice, and to hear from them, it's really been a wonderful experience for me. So I'm really, you know, enjoying and appreciating this retreat, and I hope everyone else is as well. So I appreciate you all.
Ikuse? No, maybe not. Ikuse, did you have a question?
No, I do not, except to express my deep appreciation for the depth of understanding and insight that our Dharma brother has brought to this universal human topic.
I will say one other thing too. Kosetsu, I feel like since the pandemic and everything else that is occurring in the world today, one of the things that has been very helpful is Sangha. And I tell Sensei, all the Senseis on this call, that because when the pandemic hit, I immediately outreached to all of them and said, can you help us extend practice throughout STO? Can we join together and offer, you help us offer sessions for the Sangha to be together? And, you know, immediately, you know, they were like, yes, here's the number, please put out the information, you know, and it enabled us to be able to offer throughout the Sangha wide abilities for our Sanghas to be together in the midst. And for me, you know, Kosetsu, I so agree. What you're saying is that being with the Sangha right now has been so critical for me. And, you know, foundationally, people ask me all the time, like, what's, you know, when I talk to all the senseis, what's holding it down, what's helping me is the Sangha and my personal practice throughout all aspects of my life. But just this conference was so timely. Last week was such a difficult week for me. And a lot of the times in our tech calls, we're bringing our stuff, like, before we get started with the technical stuff, I need to just, you know, let it out. So, but that is Sangha. So within in Sangha Sengaku, I think they call it the Meta Sangha. Y'all, when you were creating STO, y'all were thinking of the words of how can we support each other. So this has been such a benefit and such a resource for us, and to have people to step up. Our teachers have stepped up and offered us many offerings including Sensei taking 30 dokasans a week. And, you know, people have been flocking to us because they feel the need to be together in whatever way possible. So thank each of you for showing up. Thank each of you for continuing to practice in your respective sanghas and beyond. And Kosetsu, you know, I love you. I mean, I'm so glad you felt vulnerable enough to let us see your heart here today. As always, you're always so giving of yourself and of your knowledge. So I'm just big shout out to you as always. But the Sangha, thank you so much, everyone, for just showing up and continuing to practice. So thanks so much, Kosetsu.
And I just want to reiterate what you're saying about the Sangha. So I think most of you know that Fusatsu and I are together on the communications committee with Teshin and you know, a couple of other folks. And you think of being on a committee, it's like, oh, gee, well, that's, you know, more hours out of my work and more hours out of my week, and then work on top of that. And it can seem like an energy drain. But the funny thing is, I come out of our communications meetings energized because we're doing, you know, we're working, we're putting in some hours, but we're having a good time, we're supporting each other. And I come out of those committee meetings feeling better.
Excellent.
I think Nancy raised her hand.
Hello, I just wanted to thank you so much for your talk today and your vulnerability. And that's one of the things that I've appreciated about this retreat is people's vulnerability and their willingness to show us who they are. It's important for us people who are new to get to know everybody and to hear real stories, real life situations. And I know for me, grief has a life of its own. I mean, it has to be honored. If I don't honor it, then trouble starts in my life. So you explained it so well. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
I wanted to add something, everyone. Kosetsu, thank you so much. It was really wonderful. I really liked, especially one of the highlights for me was certainly the translation that you shared from Bachelor of the Four Noble Truths, and to make it an activity. These are actions. You know, this is something we need to engage in our lives. It's not just, okay, yeah, like you say, these are the rules, like the 10 Commandments. No, we need to actually apply them. This is our interaction with our life. These are some guidelines and activities and checklists for us to engage. We're going to experience suffering, sometimes more acute than others, but to have a way of processing through it and working through it and knowing that this is the work of our life. You know, this is why we're here, to understand more deeply and understand our inherent suffering that is a real, shows us direction if we will work to come up with a deepening understanding. If everything is always, you know, ice cream and lollipops, you know, we're not putting much effort. But now we really are coming together as a Sangha and putting in great effort. And our biggest challenges is when we gain the most, we learn the most. So anyway, thank you for really putting a spotlight on that.
I have Vana first and then Sensei Teshin. Vana, did you raise your hand? I'm sorry. Did you have your hand? Okay, all right, Sensei Teshin, sorry.
I just wanted to, did everybody else hear Kosetsu say that he comes out of committee meetings feeling energized? I just wanted to remind everyone else that you too could become energized in this way. The communications committee, which puts together all the communications that go out so people have access to what support is being offered. The retreat committee, which has been overseen by Zenku-san to put together retreats such as this, all the little details. The finance committee to try to keep everything financially solvent. All of these, the online Dharma study committee, which Kuo-san oversees and chairs, all of these committees need help, and many hands make light work. So if you have a skill or time that you are interested in contributing in that way, you can talk to myself, Fusatsu, Kuo-san, Zenku, Avidelist, and any of us, Samgak, Kosetsu, everyone who's involved with the board committees, and we would welcome you with open arms. We can't guarantee you'll come bouncing out of every committee meeting energized, but we can guarantee that your help will be appreciated. And this Saturday is our annual general meeting as part of this conference. And in the morning will be a review of what the committees have been working on. So you can sort of, and everyone is welcome to attend. You can see where you might fit in. And in the afternoon, there'll be the formal annual general meeting that we have to have each year as a registered 501c3 charitable organization, and people are welcome to attend that as well. So just a little promotional detail.
Yes, it actually worked out very nicely on our comm team to where we have like a brown robe, a black robe, a disciple, so everybody's welcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us classes in how to have more fun at our meetings?
You can, yes.
Good.
I say we always, I mean, we work hard, but we don't, it doesn't have to be miserable while we're doing it.
All right.
We also swap recipes. We're going to have a journaling workshop. What else are we going to do?
Yeah, we have to keep it. It's the self-care part of it.
Yeah.
Again, I'm doing a time check. We're at 3:23. We have about 4 more minutes before we have to start transitioning back into our practice mode. Is there any last questions or comments for Kosetsu? Kosan.
Hello. Thank you so much, Kosetsu. I really know of you, but I didn't know you. I think that if there's even one thing that could be said to be something sort of good out of this pandemic would be that I know you people differently now. So, thank you.
I agree. This is a wonderful opportunity for me as well to get to know many people here better that I haven't seen before. Or again, as you said, I know of you, but don't really know you yet. But I'm learning quickly. Okay, well, thank you again.
Mm-hmm.